So my name is Heather Physioc, and I am the Group Director of Discoverability at VMLY&R. And you may have seen Poppy, the most discoverable dog, hiding in the background here. She's my lovely assistant. So the Discoverability Group at VMLY&R, it includes organic search, paid search, and the performance content teams. And this role is actually relatively new for us in the last 2 years. We've gone through several mergers at VMLY&R and effectively doubled our agency's global footprint overnight. And with these mergers came a ton of complementary skill sets and client lists that we could do really great work for. So today we're going to talk about how we brought these 3 teams together under one discoverability umbrella and some of the learnings and the hard knocks we got along the way. So you're going to learn about the concept of interdisciplinarity, the benefits and challenges that come with cross-functional integration, and get some actionable tips on how you can actually improve collaboration in your own company, regardless of what kinds of teams you're trying to collaborate with. So again, I'm Heather. I manage these teams. My background is journalism and business, and I've been doing a lot of international speaking and writing on these business side of the business concepts. So just a few of our clients that we're doing great work with, and let's get started. So as a digital industry, we talk a great game on collaboration, but the truth is it's not actually happening how we say it happens. So in the case of agencies, we often walk into these new business pitches and we make these grand claims about how integrated we are and how we sit right next to the people that we work with on other teams, right? And we preach that our recommendations are somehow better because we have this holistic offering. Kumbaya, cute, dorky stock photo, right? Like, who does this? But then the moment we leave those meetings or those pitches, we get sucked back into our individual silos, buried by the day-to-day task lists of our jobs, and we get tunnel vision, focused on our own areas of expertise. So in the case of teams like mine, we're writing SEO scopes and PPC scopes totally separately, without accounting for things like the content resources or technical resources that we need to make these channels successful. So we end up bringing recommendations forward to our bosses or our clients that don't have buy-in from our peers in other areas of expertise. So basically, we go back to not bringing each other in, but complaining about not being brought in. So I mentioned that we went through some of the mergers recently, and when we started going through that process as an agency, we saw some opportunities. We saw the opportunity to solve content production problems that are chronic issues for search teams through integrating with the performance content team. We saw the opportunity to improve collaboration between paid search and organic search. And so we actually raised our hands to merge into one group. So now our group looks a little bit more like this. And to be clear, this is going to look different in every organization, every type of team, every type of work. There's no one silver bullet ideal team structure. And there's pros and cons to every arrangement. You may not even be on the same team or in the same company, but the principles and the learnings that I'm going to share with you today apply no matter who you're trying to integrate with, no matter whether you're in-house, agency, or something else entirely. So now we have these 3 teams under one umbrella, and before they were all perfectly smart and successful independently. So why should we move away from these 3 perfectly good separate swim lanes to one cohesive unified group? And equally important, how? So I want to introduce to you this concept of interdisciplinarity. This is an academic term for when 2 or more schools of thought combine and cross traditional boundaries to solve new shared challenges together. They get the benefits of integrating and updating their individual approaches into this new holistic approach, which helps to solve for the harmful effects of siloing and excessive specialization. And in the rapidly evolving and increasingly competitive field of search and digital and technology, we need to be thinking about this. And you find this interdisciplinarity in a lot of well-known technical and scientific fields. Think things like neuroscience, biochemistry, cybernetics. Now, I'm not saying that digital is life-saving rocket surgery or whatever, but there is definitely new ground to be forged in our field. Now, there's a huge difference between complementarity and interdisciplinarity. Anyone can go online and learn SEO or Drupal or PPC or whatever. And many teams can offer complementary strategy where you're sitting together and at least not conflicting in your work, but very few do what I would call truly interdisciplinary work, where you're offering new and evolved capabilities when you bring different specialties together. And true interdisciplinarity happens when the sum of the whole is greater than its individual parts. And it's situational, right? So you bring people with the relevant areas of expertise and specialties with their unique knowledge and experiences to the table for a more cohesive end-to-end offering that's completely bespoke for each need. And despite the fact that it's custom and bespoke for these end-to-end offerings, it's also repeatable and refinable as more similar problems come along in the future. And this concept of interdisciplinarity has been a driving force that's guided our way through all this change. Everything we do now is focused on leveling up since we joined forces. And now, not only are we offering new SEO and PPC services to our clients, but we're actually helping them to develop a lot of these interdisciplinary concepts in complex organizations, and doing that at their companies too. So we're going to talk about some of the obstacles you're likely to face, some of the wins you stand to gain, and then those actionable tips for how you can integrate better with other teams. So let's start with the toughest lessons. No pain, no gain, right? And trust me, there will be growing pains along the way. So the first major challenge that we ran into was simply moving from saying that paid and organic search collaborate to actually doing it. And it seems silly, but we've said it for so long that it's easy to get complacent and fail to see how things could be any better or more integrated than they already are. It's a huge cultural shift to change from these individual athletes on 3 different teams to a single all-star world champion team. And it doesn't happen overnight. You have to make a case. You have to agree on the importance of integrated work, and you have to do real work together to prove that it works. And the next one is the risk of becoming less agile. So counterintuitively, the larger the team, the harder it is to collaborate. And that's especially true when members of that team do very different things. So you can't become a behemoth so big that you lose your ability to move quickly. So when I originally brought our performance content team in under the organic search team name, I basically tried to force them to adapt to all of our ways of doing things, but it didn't quite fit, and it actually became hard to move everyone forward. So I had to take a step back, have a moment of humility, and we decided as a group to change our umbrella name to Discoverability. But we encouraged each of the individual teams under that umbrella to maintain their individual identity and autonomy. We had to empower everyone to make decisions that were right for their team and right for their clients, as long as it didn't run counter to what we're trying to accomplish as a whole group. So the lesson here for me was, don't force it. Group identity is important, but it doesn't negate the need for individual team autonomy. And interdisciplinary teams fail without enough autonomy. At first, I tried to force everyone to collaborate on everything all the time, but I quickly learned that this design by committee approach actually leads to frustrated people and solutions that are diluted from what they should be. So while it felt important to keep that connective tissue that bonds us as a group, we had to allow smaller teams to spin up as needed to solve different problems. And that helps to combat the problem of becoming too big to stay nimble. And while it was never us versus them, while we were merging these teams, conflicts are inevitable. So that can often take the form of perceived competition for diminishing budgets, or vying for the final say on a course of action. There's always going to be some sort of negotiating roles or turf defending when you're bringing different disciplines together. But when you're integrating like this, you're reaching a point where you're actually sharing the same turf. So it's an exercise in humility to give everyone's expertise equal weight. And it takes extra effort to give the benefit of the doubt. And you have to retrain yourself to actively seek the perspective of others instead of it being an accidental afterthought. And you have to learn when to choose your battles, fight for recommendations versus taking a back seat. We basically have to create a culture where everyone wins when one of us wins. Next is merging process. And when each team had its own way of doing things that was working perfectly well, people can often be slow or resistant to change. So it's very important when you are making change to understand each team's processes before you go in and just start ripping out parts. You have to know things, why things are the way they are first. And we've learned that trying to overhaul everything at once is a lot like boiling the ocean. So we recommend making 1% changes one at a time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And finally, change fatigue. This is a real thing. By the third merger that we went through, I had a wonderful person on my team literally say to me, I cannot change my email address one more time. Just fried. So when you're going through change after change after change, be mindful that the people who are enduring this change can experience burnout. It can feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. However, and I think this is sort of a natural habitat of the technology field, when you build a culture of ongoing testing, learning, and optimization that sets the expectation that change is necessary for growth. So we learned that to make change effectively, it makes the most sense to make change iteratively at these natural points of friction at first. So it actually feels like a relief to be making change. So a common example in the SEO industry, oftentimes keyword research from an SEO expert is a total afterthought. This is a very common friction point for SEOs. And so what happens is content gets published on websites that has absolutely no thought into whether it's even the right content to be created, or it's content for the sake of content, or it hasn't incorporated things that people actually search for. But one simple change, adding keywords and questions to a new content brief prior to creating content. That's one simple adjustment to the process, made both writers and SEOs' jobs easier. And that kind of small win helps to build momentum and endurance for more change in the future. So if it's so hard to integrate teams, why bother doing it? So one thing that we've learned is that most of our growth doesn't come from big new business pitches, but rather expanding existing client relationships and existing relationships with our internal peers. So having this knowledge helps us to intersect our offerings more than we ever have before. Cross-selling and upselling has benefited greatly from this integration, because instead of having 4 people advocating for one service on one team and 12 people advocating for another service on another team and so on, now we have 35 people advocating for one joint practice and each of the individual specialties underneath. So we're hitting record-breaking revenue every year since improving our ability to cross-sell and upsell. We're often brainstorming triggers for how and when to bring each other in. So if you had talked to me 2 or 3 years ago, only about a quarter of our clients were using more than one of these 3 specialties at our agency. And now more than 85% of our clients are using at least 2, if not all 3 of our teams for different services. So as an example in my space, frequently we're cross-selling when clients get stuck on content production resources. Having this more integrated approach gives you the ability to shift budget around more seamlessly, to be able to do things like creating content ourselves or offering content pilots so we can show our writing chops, improve the kinds of search outcomes we can get. It's like a try before you buy. Another benefit that we've had with organic and search, or organic and paid search coming together, is now we're talking about how we can dominate whole organic search results pages together. So instead of PPC having a conversation in one room and SEO having a conversation in another room, we're talking about how we can dominate whole search engine results pages and how those channels play off of each other to seize every discoverable space possible. And it also helps to reduce the line itemizing out of one team or the other when it comes to scoping. The integrative approach, this interdisciplinary approach, can also lead to greater speed and scale in our work. we're better able to distribute work across our team. So the performance content team, for example, can now write SEO title tags and meta descriptions and PPC ad copy, so we can shift up and down as demand changes. We've got paid search and organic search experts doing joint competitive analysis and keyword research together, which reduces duplication of efforts. Or we have our team dividing and conquering these strategic search playbooks, depending on the need, which allows us to cover more research ground more quickly and from more perspectives. And we're sharing our learnings and we're peer reviewing from our individual areas of expertise. And all of this speeds up the delivery of our product by full weeks, and it simply delivers better work. Another benefit is that knowledge sharing becomes second nature. When you have a more integrated approach, you're going to find opportunities that you simply would not have seen before. It's just fact that a deeper and wider pool of knowledge builds a deeper and smarter bench of talent. So, for example, we have done e-commerce work for a consumer sweets brand for a long time. And by having this more integrated approach, we've been able to optimize content across retailer sites like Amazon or Walmart and owned properties like thebrands.com. We've been able to coordinate our e-commerce and non-e-commerce keyword research for maximum visibility across all of those different platforms. We're better able to overcome shopper objections when we're writing product detail pages based on keyword research from search experts. All of this leads to less work, less cannibalization, and by the way, it's winning awards. So boiling this down to some cultural principles, we had to create a culture of vulnerability and sharing, where no one feels the pressure to know everything and people are unafraid to ask for help. We had to create a crowdsourced culture where we pool our knowledge and we find efficiencies and solve problems faster rather than fighting battles alone and from only one point of view. And we had to create an innovation culture where we're constantly finding these points of friction and frustration, and then we're optimizing and developing new ways of working so we can streamline and pick up speed. And as you progressively integrate with other disciplines more and more, this holistic approach starts to emerge that minimalizes cannibalism and competition, because we stop worrying about whose budget and whose targets, and we instead start thinking about what's best for the brand or the business. And this allows us to steer resources and effort to where the greatest impact will be felt. So we have a big B2B client, one of my absolute favorite clients, and our first year working with them, they gave every discipline individual objectives by team. And when you have that kind of situation, it runs the risk of making it every team for themselves. But at the end of the day, our agency is held to a single double-digit percentage of growth year over year, and it doesn't matter which channels deliver as long as we deliver. So we had a lot of interesting findings last year, thanks to this more holistic search approach. For example, our SEO and PPC experts actually realized that when paid search spend was paused, organic search traffic spiked for a certain set of high volume keywords. So that knowledge that they wouldn't have spotted independently, only if they're working together, allowed them to develop a test for shifting paid search budget around for keywords where we're already ranking #1. So all of that to say that these more holistic ideas are leading to better outcomes for the client, and the client is actually noticing the difference and thanking us for that more holistic approach. It's also important to note that trust and visibility increase when you have a more collaborative approach. And by that, I mean your recommendations have more weight and more credibility when they are vetted from multiple experts. You need to be talking about joint opportunities and talking about how technologies and channels perform together and separately. In our case, we have to balance our paid and organic recommendations. The more thoughtful and versatile and diversified approach is more easily defensible to your boss or your client. If you can demonstrate more bang for their buck, the reco is easier to say yes and invest. And you'll also find that new capabilities tend to emerge at the intersections between these different practices. When you see these new opportunities, joint teams can help build and launch these unified services. For us, that took the form of things like digital shelf optimization for e-commerce brands or enhanced landing page development. And defining these deliverables across these practices helps our colleagues to sell and scope this new form of our work. And it makes our offerings repeatable, and we continue to refine them together. And this unified approach has led to competitive advantage that we simply didn't experience before. Now, competitive advantage is when you're willing to put in the legwork that competitors can't, won't, or don't. And interdisciplinarity gives us unique points of distinction and capabilities that others simply do not have. And it's becoming increasingly indispensable to our clients. They can't imagine going back to the world of silos from before. So true interdisciplinarity is difficult to accomplish, but it's hard for competitors to replicate. So let's talk about how you can apply this too. We looked at industries beyond search for inspiration to get this right. We looked at academia, the sciences, social work. So remember, these tips apply no matter whether you're agency or in-house, if you're search or do something else. Building the world's most connected brands starts with connected teams. So this has become my group's mantra ever since we started integrating. Everything we do as a unified group is focused on creating more value to your brands, for our brands. So what is your mantra? You need to give your teams a guiding light that defines every move that you make as you're integrating and collaborating. So the first tip I have is to announce change quickly. Rip the Band-Aid off and do it fast. Make it clear what you're trying to accomplish with integration and why. You'll have to make the case to these participants for the benefits and be honest about the challenges that you're going to face in order to get their buy-in. You need to get people involved in the mission as soon as possible and set the expectation that you sink or you swim together. The most successful people in the face of change are those who do not waste time obstructing the inevitable, but rather roll up their sleeves and look for ways to help. And then I recommend immediately taking action to bring the teams together and actually activate on that change. And that means getting people in a room or a digital room face to face as early and often as possible, and starting a dialogue around the common mission and vision. You should be brainstorming ideas on how to move forward together. And once established, this new process or group or department, make sure to reintroduce the team or the capabilities to your organization. Put faces with names. Tell them what this new capability is and who's responsible for what. So when we merged with the agency Rockfish, we held something called the Rockfish Sessions. And so we brought all of our new team members out to Kansas City, and we had introductions and icebreakers and get to know yous. We had overarching sessions that sort of oriented people in the department and the individual teams. And then we had a ton of sessions sharing out our capabilities and case studies and processes that each team uses. And of course, we had to get to know each other beyond the work. So we did plenty of team building exercises, went out to dinner and drinks, and so on. And so we had that big joint session where we announced and immersed quickly, but then it's time to slow down to speed up when it comes to actually implementing that change. Now, remember we talked earlier about not trying to boil the ocean and change everything at once? Instead, you want to focus on 1% iterative changes one at a time at those natural points of intersection or moments of friction and frustration. And when you're implementing this change, make sure you're giving ownership of the different initiatives to people that you're bringing together from each side. That helps you to ensure that you're considering all the angles, and it really helps to get buy-in across the group when you're actually launching that to the larger group. Now, this is one of my favorite principles. No process is precious. When you're bringing these people together, you have to commit as a group to establishing clear new processes that incorporate all the key stakeholders. Bring those voices to the table to collaborate in creating and refining those workflows that are going to affect them. We also recommend creating a living wiki for process, which reinforces that message of steady evolution. So our team in particular uses Confluence, the Atlassian product, as our living wiki, where we document our recurring workflows, we are referencing them often, and we're updating and reorganizing them regularly. Everyone across the group has total access and trust, and even the expectation to continuously refine that. And as a group, we're always checking in on what isn't working and ditching what doesn't serve us. I highly recommend cross-training to build advocacy as well. So we conduct this continuous cross-training in each other's skills, not necessarily to be able to do each other's jobs, but rather to be able to speak about them, advocate for them, and cross-sell them. We've done a number of workshops and hands-on trainings. We've tried our hands at swapping tasks, like several of our SEOs writing e-commerce product detail pages. And it creates empathy and it builds trust to the point where we can fill in for each other if the others aren't in the room. And it creates these mental checkpoints where you're asking, am I including the right people in this? Could my work be affecting someone else? And then we try to make that a habit in our team by course correcting people when they forget and validating and rewarding them when they get this right. And we also focus a lot on productizing our new integrated service offerings. So in our first year as an integrated group, we set a team goal of productizing 10 of our offerings. So enhancing our recurring SEO and performance content services with new capabilities to make them stronger. And then together we would develop these all new joint offerings that didn't exist before. And from there, we appointed small cross-team committees to define the value, inputs, outputs, cost, timing, and process for each of those things. So for us, that's stuff like search-driven content insights to support big burst campaigns with supplemental content, or our approach to e-commerce discoverability. So this is a look at our digital shelf optimization service across all three of our discoverability teams. So when clients are asking us for e-commerce, they're not expecting 1/3 of a solution or one small task. And this joint process identifies a whole end-to-end approach for e-commerce so clients can be their most effective. So no longer are we trying to sell 3 individual things a la carte, we're selling one whole solution. And this seems like it should be going without saying, but different disciplines should be reviewing and recommending and reporting together. In digital marketing in particular, it is a chronic problem that we see these disjointed reporting slides smashed together at the last minute, and we're throwing it over to the fence to the client. When really our teams and our experts should be compiling and discussing this data together. What is the larger story that the data is telling us that the client should care about? It's our responsibility as digital experts to help them prioritize where to focus. And different disciplines should be evaluating which opportunities to pursue together. This is simple, and yet it's rarely done. I strongly recommend collecting insights and perspectives from people across different areas of expertise, presenting your findings to each other, and deciding the biggest opportunity and joint roadmap together. So that same B2B client that I mentioned earlier, we had a major local search opportunity. They're a big national brand, but they've got over 1,000 locations, physical locations around the country, right? And so they're competing not just on that national scale, but on this hyper-local front. And they're going up against mom and pop shops in individual markets. So when the client came to us, they asked for data to make better local marketing decisions. Now notice they didn't ask for local SEO or local PPC, they asked for a local strategy. And so originally, individual team leads kind of scratched their heads. We were maybe skeptical we could deliver on the ask until we got together in a room with people from all different areas of expertise. It was like we cracked some kind of code. So we found ourselves bringing data together from all different sources. We had demographic and psychographic information from paid media, click data from paid search, local search keywords from organic search, inventory and sales and location data from the client. And so using all of these inputs from all of these different perspectives, we built a really cool Tableau data visualization tool where we can slice and dice those data points on a moment's notice and make decisions on the fly that have huge implications for every channel that we're running for this brand. Monthly account strategy sessions. So it's easy to get stuck in the status quo where we're retiring to our own individual corners. So this account strategy session at minimum is a time to share what's happening in our different departments. And this session is bigger than a to-do list or a status sheet, right? We should be discussing and strategizing together how the brand is performing, problems we are solving, opportunities we're seeing, big risks or threats that are on the horizon, joint efforts and tests that we can be running. This simple meetup can benefit any group that you're trying to collaborate with. So establish these recurring roundtables with other departments or regions to brainstorm and deep dive opportunities together. And after a few months of doing these, it becomes more than just a meeting, but a way of life. And I strongly recommend considering a networked team model where you have central sources of truth and ways of operating, but the actual execution and bringing it to life is decentralized. So an ideal networked team allows you to spin up small task forces for specific objections. It's very low hierarchy, transparent, and open. It allows those smaller teams to calibrate and adjust to one another quickly, but they're all operating from common standards and best practices. They are able to use those existing central sources of truth to spin up things however they need to deliver on the ask. So it's this nice balance between local team empowerment and centralized control. So the same process could come to life in dozens of different ways by brand, category, objective, whatever. So I showed you that e-commerce optimization workflow a few minutes ago. That's a very solid, repeatable joint workflow. But the way that we sell consumer packaged goods on a third-party retailer like Amazon is completely different from how we're going to sell a fast fashion brand direct to consumer on their own .com website. And so we are able to spin up a different team makeup or approach to deliver on whatever that unique need is. And you have to create a culture of feedback. I can't emphasize this enough. Coaching and direct, immediate feedback can greatly speed up the process of integration and collaboration. I used to say you have to empower people to give feedback, but that's not enough. You have to expect people to speak up and contribute ideas. So make sure that you're making transparency and accountability a part of your collective culture. So that means giving feedback to each other and giving feedback to you. It means peer reviewing each other's work and recommendations. And it means scrutinizing processes and our ways of doing things. It makes the work stronger. It decreases the margin for error. It makes the people stronger. And it makes that culture of feedback less personal and more about the work itself. And don't just tell other people to do it. You have to model it as a leader and teach your peers how to do this constructively and empathetically, and then hold them to account when they're not living it. I strongly recommend marketing collaborative successes. Marketing successes can be a major driver of integration. We should always be monitoring to spot collective wins or warnings to create case studies. So find meaningful wins that cross different teams and disciplines, and make sure your teams, clients, bosses, colleagues are hearing these stories. It helps increase buy-in and understanding and engagement with that collaborative group. So one way we do this in our group, we present joint case studies from across disciplines in our all-group quarterly meetings. And then this one I say figuratively these days, who you sit with matters, who you interact with matters. This is probably one of the biggest challenges that has come with the coronavirus separateness, right? Is that you're not just turning your chair around and asking people questions or bumping into people in the hallway. So you have to be a little bit more intentional about this now than we maybe had to before. But it's really important to have that ability to strike up a conversation about things that you're working on. So knowing with coronavirus or otherwise, rearranging the floor plan isn't in the cards for everyone. If it doesn't make sense because you're at different companies or in different cities or in different houses, you still need to look for every opportunity for human contact, whether that's video chat, travel for in-person meetings, desk bomb drive-bys, spend part of your day parked with your colleagues in their part of the office, or do real-time chatting and phone calls, whatever it takes to be present, because those integrative moments pop up in those moments of connection. So to wrap it all up, what have we learned? As individual teams, we are experts, but as integrated practices, we're a powerhouse. So that is a quote from my colleague Britt, super smart and astute observation. Selling whole end-to-end services that have greater impact together than separately makes us more indispensable to our bosses and our clients who can't imagine going back to the disjointed world of before. And doing our individual jobs is relatively easy, but doing them together and developing all new ways to do them and doing it well is hard. And getting that right helps us stand out from the competition. And it's a major cultural shift to move from those individual teams to a joint group. And it's an iterative process with lots of growing pains along the way, but it's worth it. And that doesn't have to mean merging teams. It can be creating a competency circle around a certain type of work or a certain client or a certain process that transcends the org chart. And as time goes on, new things are created, the group matures, and the lines between them start to blur. And that's a good thing. And when your new culture is established, make sure that you are hiring and promoting people for the traits that sustain it. It's things like communication, being a team player, collaboration, accountability, transparency, empathy. And finally, there will be bumps along the way. Integrating different experts in different disciplines can be frustrating and time-consuming, but if you create a culture of openness and vulnerability and feedback, if you create an expectation of iteration and evolution and change, then you have the fortitude to get through these obstacles together and forge something entirely new. So remember, competitive advantage comes from doing the things that your competitors can't, won't, or don't. Because if it were easy, everyone would do it. Thank you so much. I'm Heather Physioc, and I hope to hear from some of you with questions, comments, and reach out.